I know that that the British accent, like, I know that it's cute and everything, but I also know that if you're not used to a British accent, that my accent's kind of thick and it can be hard to understand me. And I appreciate that. And so I'm really bad at reading and writing, and normally I don't put any words apart from titles on my slides, unless they're words I know how to spell. Like, I know how to spell my own name, so that's generally okay. But I have put bullet points throughout my presentation. I would see them as an approximation of what I'm trying to say, because I think that, like, autocorrect and stuff, like, I don't think writing things down, despite the fact I've written 2 books, is not necessarily going to be a good way for me to communicate. It's not that accurate. I think that's the thing. It's not accurate. It's like Apple Maps, you know, versus Google Maps. Like, it's just not that accurate. And so, so listen to what I'm saying, and if there's something you don't understand, please don't feel embarrassed to ask. Also, my good friend Jasmine is here, and Jasmine and I have known each other for 10 years, and I've come and stayed in her house about 10 times, and I know that Jasmine generally understands what I'm saying, so maybe Jasmine can help translate. Also, Jasmine is fluent in Spanish, so if you need it in Spanish, Jasmine, I'm sure, would be able to help. Sorry for just electing you as my translator, but you might not need it. And with me, I have Henry, and Henry is my support bat. And he's a sensory bat, and he's very important. He's been looking after Patrick's clicker. The title of this talk is Autism from a Person, Not Just a Textbook. And what this presentation is about is not just my own experience. I'll talk about that, because I know that that's important. But basically, about 7 years ago, I asked the Mind Institute if I could come and give a talk, and they said no, because we only really do research talks. And now I'm an honorary research associate at University College London, and I'm also a member of the core team who won the Wellcome Trust, which is one of the biggest funders of health research in Europe, their Hub Award, which is £1 million and 2 years worth of resources and a physical space in central London. And I feel very privileged to be part of that team. It's the first time I've had a job where they've actually really listened when I've said I don't really read and write. Like, that is, like, I can read and write, but it's not very accurate. It's not a real good way for me to communicate. You actually, like, and there are other people on my team who have intellectual disabilities, and so everything has to be represented in, like, pictures or audio. We have a big wall that we use for planning, and it has paper squares stuck on with white tack, and they say the date and the thing that's happening in simple words. And then everyone has what we call emojis, but really they're avatars. We all drew a little picture, and then we photocopy them, and then our pictures of us, they're like our icon. You know, like, you can recognize the restroom icon. Well, it's like that, but we're people, obviously. So mine's an R with a hat, like on my name up there. And so, yeah, so that's how we communicate. We know who's going to be there by the pictures and not by loads of words. And it's been fantastic to have that. And I feel like I've taken my research that I do now more seriously, because I do a very particular type of sort of community interest research, and I will talk about that more in a bit. So anyway, yeah, so my life experiences. I thought I'd put this in because I thought that people always want to know about my life experiences, even though I don't think it's the most interesting thing about me, because I'd much rather talk about the wider autism spectrum than just my life, because I'm just one person. But, you know, I can appreciate that it's useful. I've heard other autistic people speak, and I found it useful. So I know that this is what people want, so I'm giving it to you. Okay, so you can see the little map down there, which might be small for those of you at the back. I'll use my pointer, Patrick's pointer. There we go, there's the map. And that's that blue dot is where I was born. I was born 3 months early, so I was a premature kid, and I have cerebral palsy. and lacked ligaments and poor muscle tone, and prosopagnosia, which means I don't recognize faces. And all that stuff was diagnosed very early on. Autism was diagnosed age 11. I have Aspergers, technically. And then I have dyslexia and dyscalculia. That was diagnosed at 20. I have dyspraxia, was probably diagnosed around 3. Scarred lung tissue and visual difficulties, and like a lot of autistic people, anxiety and depression. But thankfully that's managed with medication now, so that's good. So anyway, I have what they call in the research world early onset autism, which just means that it was very noticeable right away that I didn't point at things. I mean, not when you're first born, obviously, you don't point at things, but I spent 3 months in the hospital before I came home. Technically it was 10 weeks, but it was 3 months basically. And I didn't cuddle up to my mum. I didn't, when I was a bit older, point at things or want to be picked up. And so my mum started to try and find ways of communicating with me, whatever it was that she could do. And so she tried everything, and then she found that music was the thing I responded to. So she started playing the guitar to me, and then she found this special needs music group, and she took me to that. And that's where I learned to talk, because I started saying some of the words. And I still now, I think, oh yeah, I can see why I have problems, because like, it's taken me all this time, like since 2014, to be able to say Arbin, and I'm not even sure if I can always say it reliably, right? But, you know, and when I'd ring a voicemail or when she'd tell me, like, it just went by so quick, so if every single word was like that, it doesn't surprise me that I'd have a hard time understanding and learning words, because my auditory processing for unfamiliar sounds or new sounds isn't that quick. And so I can do a great job of looking like I really understand what's being said around me and have absolutely no idea of what's going on, because I've had to do that all my life. I've had to, because often I'm in situations where I'm not really sure what to do right now, but I'm just going to smile and look cute, and Henry's going to smile, and we're just going to stand here. And that's been a lot of my life. So then I went to school and I started playing, you'd say the cornet, I'd say the cornet, when I was 8. And I struggled with a lot of the motor tasks, like being able to do my shoelaces. I didn't learn to do that until I was 21. Using a knife and fork, all those kind of things. And when I think about it, it's not surprising I had difficulty doing those things. But the school really focused on like being able to tie your shoelaces. But any of you that work in occupational therapy or developmental psychology will know that it takes, like, you need a lot of skills before you can actually tie your shoelaces. And so you have to be able to use those skills before you can tie your shoelaces, and I wasn't at that point yet. When I was in this special needs classroom within a mainstream primary school, which is age sort of 4.5 to 11, and then when I was 11, I stayed on an extra year and they mainstreamed me, which didn't last very long. It was a big disaster because the teacher, she didn't want to teach a special needs child because she told me that I was behind. I learnt, you know, slower than everybody else. And up until that point, I don't think I'd been aware that my learning was any different to other people's learning. I did experience a bit of bullying in primary school, but I think most kids probably do, whether they're on the spectrum or not. But it wasn't terrible. It was kind of like, that was a rough day, but it wasn't as bad as it was in high school. And then in the UK, high school is 11 to 16 or 18. Now everyone has to stay in education until they're 18. And I was bullied every day. They'd call me like a spastic and a retard and a freak. They'd locked me in the toilets, and I'd been scared of toilets, and they'd picked up on that fear. I had my, well, we'd say shorts. I don't know what you'd say, because you say pants, and pants for us means underpants, but you know, short pants. And my, when I say chonies, I've learned that off Jasmine. I don't know if that's, is that Spanish for, yeah. So, okay, it's Mexican. Okay, well, so they pulled my chonies and my shorts down in the middle of the street, which was really embarrassing. And they'd scrawl things on the local bus shelter that I'd walk past every day, like Robyn's a spastic, Robyn's a retard, Robyn's a reject. And this went on for years and years, and my parents tried moving me to a different school, and that made, Well, the bullying was slightly better, but ultimately what happened is I got kicked out when I was 15, and I have no qualifications that are like meaningful. Like I have an ASDAN, but no one's heard of that, so it's not really meaningful. And so high school for me was very hard. And now, when I think about it, I think, well, I was just overwhelmed all the time, constantly. And I didn't have a clear, like now, if I'm on a plane for like 11 hours from London to San Francisco, actually it was 10 hours and 19 minutes, this last flight recently. But normally it's like 11 hours. I have to have a plan for what I'm gonna do hour by hour. Like, I have to know, okay, well, I'm going to watch 3 movies, and these are the 3 movies I'm going to watch, and then I'm going to eat the food, and I'm going to take a nap, and then I'm going to do some drawing, and if I'm bored, I can start my laptop. I have to have this plan for what I'm going to do. So it's no wonder I found break and lunchtime hard, because it was just like, well, no one's got a plan. I'm just wandering around by myself because I don't have any friends. And the only friend I really had was the IT teacher. And he taught me 3 things. His name was Ernest, and I think that these 3 things are things that everybody can do. The first thing was that he really listened to me. And you know, I think that when we talk about listening, we often talk about it in the sort of context of neurotypical listening, which means making eye contact. And that doesn't necessarily work for all autistic kids. We used to have conversations where I'd sit on one side of the room and I wouldn't be facing him, and he'd be sat that other side of the room. And that worked for me, because actually I found it a bit intense being sat face to face with somebody. I much preferred it. I like people, but like sometimes I've had enough of people. I'm a bit peopled out. And I think when I was a teenager, I was very peopled out. And so, yeah, so that was the one thing, is that listening in a meaningful way to that person, and you might have to ask them how, because sometimes I've worked with kids as a mentor, and they've said stuff like, oh, my teacher doesn't like me, or, you know, stuff that I know isn't true because I've spoken to the teacher. And so I asked them, well, why do you think that? And they'll come up with these reasons, and with their permission, I talked to the teacher, I'm like, look, you need to like have a conversation with this kid about how you communicate with each other, because your child communicates in a different way. And, well, you know, I know there's 29 other people in this classroom, but generally it's just about being direct and about saying what you mean and not just relying on your body language to communicate. The second thing was about being part of the school community. I mean, I was still an outcast, but I was taking pictures for the school website, and that was pretty good. And the third thing was really about sharing. He would give me £1 and ask me to go and get a can of pop from the machine and get one for myself, and then the next day I'd get one for myself and I'd get one from him, and then we'd switch round, which you couldn't do now because all schools are so focused on healthy eating. But soda cans taught me about how to share, because they were cheap, and this is like, there's not harmful for a teacher to give you $1 and, you know, you head off to the machine, and then the next day you do the same thing, but it's with your money and so forth. You learn about sharing that way, and you learn about, you know, how friendship works, that it's back and forth, and it's not all take, but equally it's not all give. And I really think that, you know, those 3 things, they're simple things. And Ernest wasn't like my key worker or anything. I'm sure that maybe he didn't really want some little, you know, I was tiny, some little 4-foot kid come into the IT room every day and like want to talk at him about how terrible my day was, because my days were pretty terrible, and I'm sure that he must have got fed up with that, but he was very patient, like Henry. I'm very thankful that I had Ernest in my life, and I'm happy to say we keep in touch via email, and that if you are a teacher or a professional, just know that you could be that special person in that person's life, and like you could make a difference and an impact. You know, he didn't abuse his power or anything, but later on there were professionals who did abuse their power, and I think if it had been the other way around and I'd met those professionals before I met Ernest, then maybe I wouldn't have been there to trust him. So, you know, like you know, as a professional, the kind of least but most important thing you can do is set an example for how professionals treat their clients or treat their pupils. You know, like about professional boundaries, and you can talk about that. And I think having those kind of explicit conversations about what a child should expect from a professional is really important, because then if a professional does something out of those guidelines, they know, hi, I should talk to somebody. And you know, if you talk to one person and they won't listen, well, talk to another person. You just keep talking to people until someone listens, because eventually someone will. And that's important, that we are ready to listen. And that's why that thing about listening is important. We have to listen in the way that our, you know, the young people or the adults in our life need us to listen. So after getting kicked out of school, I went to further education college. It's a bit like community college. Because basically my parents were like, well, you either stay in school, which I'd have got kicked out of anyway, or you go to further education college. I chose further education college. And the main draw was that the thing is that I was interested in learning. It wasn't like I didn't want to learn. I just found all the, you know, like going on school trips and the unstructured times and moving from one subject to another and the having to write things when I'm really not good at that was very difficult. And so being able to just study pretty much one subject, which was computers, that really worked for me. I made my first friend, who's called Nicholas. We're still friends today. And like the thing about community college is that I don't know what they're like here, but in the UK they have loads of different people, different ages, and the thing that brings us all together is they all want to be there. And so that was a really helpful thing. But also I was able to take breaks when I needed to. Sometimes I just needed to go for a walk, you know, like a lesson isn't so important that I couldn't catch up later. I could take a break, and the people in the lunchroom, they would save my favorite sandwich. And after a while, I didn't need them to do that anymore because I felt comfortable. But often I find that like the sensory world I'm trying to manage is a bit overwhelming. And so if I can have something that's regular and the same, I really appreciate it, because sometimes the world is just really overwhelming for me and I just need something to stay the same because it's really stressful. And then when I'm a bit less stressed, then I can try new things and it's much easier. But I think that sensory stress threshold, I think I see that in a lot of autistic people that I know. In my current research, I've heard a lot, it's on self-employment, but I've heard loads of people talk about sensory stuff. This piece of jewelry I'm wearing is made by this lady. Her brand's a Fancy Fidget and Lullaby Links. And she made this jewelry when she was pregnant with her first child, because she needed jewelry that would meet her baby's needs and meet her sensory needs. And you can play with it and it's perfectly safe, and the baby could put it in their mouth and it was all safe. And well, I guess maybe she designed it when her baby was born. Anyway, when her baby was small, whether she was pregnant or whether the baby was born. But anyway, and then other people like, I went to an art studio and they were talking about how a lot of people like doing their little minute work, and then they're doing these big works to help people to think differently. And there just seems to be a lot of like sensory stuff for autistic people. A great book about it is Olga Bagdashina's book, Autism Perception. I think it's called Autism Perception Differences in Autism Spectrum Disorder. If you go to jkp.com, like J like Jaguar, K like Kilo, P like Papa.com, and type in Olga, O-L-G-A, in the search box. Look for the pale blue cover with the kiwi fruits. There's different coloured kiwi fruits that like, when you cut a kiwi fruit in half, like I don't know what you call the middle bit of the kiwi fruit. But anyway, a bunch of those in different colours on a light blue background. That's the book. So that's like a really good book. So then I moved to a different college to do a different course, and I was getting bullied. And they told me that it was my fault, that I brought the bullying on myself. And then I got the opportunity to join this Aspergers support group, which I'm not a great fan of Aspergers support groups, but this particular group was like getting all the students with Aspergers together. And what I learned from it was we were kind of all in the same boat. We all wanted training for staff, and I said, well, why don't we do the training? So that's what we did. And that's when I first learned about theory of mind, which is a phrase coined by Alan Leslie, Simon Baron Cohen, and Uta Frith. I think that's right. And anyway, It means putting yourself in other people's shoes, not literally, but like being able to take someone else's perspective, understand somebody else's thoughts and feelings, predict what somebody else might do. And often autistic people find theory of mind really hard to learn, and it doesn't come naturally, whereas for non-autistic kids, they often learn that naturally. Anyway, there's lots of research on theory of mind, and there's books on it and stuff. But I learned about it through a paper written by Judith Gould and Lorna Wing called the Camberwell Study, which in 1979 looked at all these kids in Camberwell. And it introduced the idea of the triad of impairments, which is now people know that autism affects, you know, a broader, wider range of things now. But I mean, for me, that was very enlightening because I realized, oh, the problem here is that I don't understand non-autistic people, and the non-autistic people don't understand me. Well, what can I do about that? Well, I could teach the non-autistic people about autism, and maybe they can teach me about non-autistic people once they understand that I don't understand them. And so that's what I did. And sure enough, the bullying stopped. And then I went to another college. I tried normal jobs, like I worked for PC World. It's a bit like Best Buy. And yeah, that didn't really work. And then I decided, oh, you know what, maybe I'm just going to have to like do some autism training, because that's the last thing I'd done that I got paid for, and people said I was good at it. So I just started ringing people saying, hi, my name's Robyn and I have autism and I do autism training. Would you like to book me? And some people said yes. I went to university in Cambridge, or it's when I lived in Manchester. It's really why I put the slide up, because I thought you'd like to know Manchester there. It's near Liverpool, where the Beatles come from. Anyway, so I went to university for a year, despite the fact that I have no equivalent of GEDs or anything like that, nothing. I went to university for a year and started mentoring autistic kids, decided autism was much more interesting than computers. But also I started volunteering with the National Autistic Society, and I was on a news program, and I was talking about a study which was called PEERS, which is the acronym's written up there. Yeah, it does definitely have 2 E's. I know that looks weird, but it has 2 E's. Anyway, the study was from UCLA, and I applied to the Charlie Bain Travel Trust Award. My university put me forward for it, and I got it, and they paid for me to go to UCLA, and then everyone said, oh, you should visit San Francisco. So then I rang pretty much every autism not-for-profit and university in San Francisco and said, hey, I'm Robyn, and do you think I could sleep on your couch? And eventually someone said yes. You know, because I thought, well, autism not-for-profits and schools and universities, they're bound to be safe, right? So in 2008, I first came to California, and I've been coming pretty much every year ever since. I called the lady that I was talking about her study, and I just called her. I was like, hey, my name's Robyn. She knew who I was, and she was like, yeah, sure, you should come. So she looked after me. And then now, fast forward 11 years, I've written 2 books. I never thought I'd write a book. I mean, it seems ridiculous to me that I've written 2, and now I'm writing 3. You know, the 3rd one is ridiculous. Because I thought I was thick until I was 26, and then in 10 days in June 2012, not consecutive days, but 10 days in June 2012, I wrote like 45 to 50,000 words, and realized, oh, I'm not thick, I'm like a zip folder. Like, you double click on me and it all downloads, except rather than downloading to your desktop, it downloads through the keyboard. And I was like, oh, okay, so this is my problem, is that I suck in all of this information and then I just download it. Okay, well, that's pretty good for writing books. The first book was about women's safety, and I did a survey of 100 autistic women and 100 non-autistic women. And probably unsurprisingly found that autistic people are more likely to be manipulated, and yeah, they're more susceptible to that kind of thing, more gullible. And so I wrote a book about safety and practical strategies, and I'm very, I guess that maybe you might say that my books are written for everyday people, and that's important to me, but I sort of follow the same rules of academia in a way that I have peer reviewers. Normally I have 5 of them, and I try and get a 50-50 split autism or like autistic people and non-autistic people and people within the field. So the next book I wrote was the Autism Friendly Guide to Periods, and that has a GP was one of my peer reviewers and also a gynecologist. But then I also had an autistic girl and an autistic mum of a girl. So I tried to even it out as much as possible. And I did a lot of work with the school called Limpsfield Grange School, who are a girls' school, and most of their pupils are on the autism spectrum. And then I'm in a bunch of books. I also have no idea why that happened, but there you go. And I have a bunch of academic papers published. If you go to Google Scholar and you type in r.steward and autism, you'll probably find me. And also my website. But I'm not that interested in academic papers. Like, it's good that I can say, hey, you know what, I'm a proper researcher now. I'm a co-author and a lead author. But I'm more interested in kind of community research, like community interest research, like something that benefits the community and is of interest to the community, rather than just because I want to find out the answer. I also, outside of the research work I do, which at the moment takes up a lot of my time, but I also run an arts-funded project. It's funded by a couple of well, I guess you'd say private not-for-profits, in that they're not government agencies. One is called Help Musicians UK, and the other is called Performing Rights Society Foundation. And I also have support from Heart and Soul, who believe in the power and talents of people with learning disabilities, which is, in US speak, it's intellectual disabilities and autism. And I run this thing called Robyns Rocket, and basically I sit on the floor and I play the trumpet through guitar pedals. I do that anyway, but I decided that, because I've been to loads of gigs, I love music, and I found I had to teach myself how to go to gigs, and I also found sometimes it was really difficult and a bit scary, especially if I was going on my own, and I wanted to create gigs that would be like, a gig is a concert, it's kind of more the informal way, or a show, it's sometimes called in the US, but it's a gig in England, and I just wanted it to be more just more kind of people-friendly. Like, okay, so I have auditory processing issues, but what if English isn't your first language? Everyone should be entitled to be able to go out and have a nice time. And like, so if you exclude people who don't speak English as their first language, or have auditory processing problems, then that seems wrong. We should have everyone together, because unity is much better than separation. And so I decided I wanted to create nights that would be as kind of people-friendly as possible. I call them inclusive conscious, so they're not autism-friendly events. They're not, they're not deemed as for the learning disability community, because then, able-bodied people won't come. They're just inclusive conscious, but that means that we are conscious, i.e. we're thinking about including people, and that's not specific to disability. It's not specific to gender or race or language or anything else, but we're just conscious of trying to include as many people as possible. And it's the same with the audience as with the performers, so I always make sure that there's a mix. And I'm not choosing people just because we need a band with learning disabilities. I'm choosing bands I actually like. I have to like them to put them on. So basically they're either on a Sunday afternoon, and in which case we have 3 acts, or they're on a Thursday evening and we have 4 acts. And I play the trumpet through guitar pedals, making kind of spacescapes for 5 minutes at the beginning of each act, to just tell people that, okay, it's ready now. I'm generally in at least one of the acts, but I often do cameos into them. Like the last one, I'm in this band called the Vals of Surplus Value, and I got to dress up as a ghost, which just meant I put a bed sheet over me, and I put my hat on top. But I enjoyed being a ghost. It's like one of my favourite things, like dressing up and stuff like that. But yeah, so I do this, and now we got given some money, and we have crew T-shirts, that are yellow, so that if you are lonely or you need to know something, you can pick out people who are going to be on call and going to be like friendly. And we communicate the program on tables. We have these things called table talkers. Basically, you fold a piece of A4 in 3 and it becomes a pyramid. You can do it like that, but we have plastic ones just because hopefully they'll last longer. And you just put your sheet of paper in it, and then on the stage, each area has a shape and a colour, and that represents the acts, so you don't have to read. And then all understand spoken English, and then that's also on the timetable, like the red square is going to be first, or the green circle is going to be second, and so forth. And then if you flip it round, there's on the next face of the table talker, there's the list of the merchandise that like the green circle has brought and how much it is, so that you can think about colours and shapes in whatever language is best for you. And then you can go over to the merch table and it's all shape and colour coordinated so that you can find things. And we have tap pay as well as normal money pay and chip and pin. So it's like there's a lot of thought that goes into it, and we make the stage look like a spaceship, and we have live drawn visuals by an artist with learning disabilities on the ceiling and the walls while the performance is going on. And we have sunglasses that people can borrow, and ear defenders, and also we have like, they were supposed to be disposable earplugs, but they sent me reusable earplugs. Obviously, they're only reusable one per person. Like, you're not going to share earplugs, but they were called rockets, so I was quite happy, and they're purple, which works. So, but this is really important to me, and it started off as a basement thing in southeast London, a place called Deptford, and now we're at one of Europe's premier venues. I don't know if any of you are into like experimental left field music. But if you are and you read The Wire, you'll have seen Cafe Otto as one of the places that is, you know, like sort of world renowned. And we have people like Thurston Moore play and Mike Watt, and the Sunra Orchestra. Like if those names mean anything to you, you probably understand. Cafe Otto is kind of a big deal, and well, there I am sitting on the floor playing the trumpet, and yeah, so that's really important to me. So now I thought I'd talk about my research a bit, but I wonder if I might just pause for a moment and see if anyone has any questions.
You mentioned during your talk that you didn't really appreciate the Aspergers support group. Would you mind kind of explaining that a little bit more?
I think that grouping people by diagnosis is silly. You should group people by their interests, and that sometimes I feel like people with Asperger's are sort of put together because they're like, oh, well, you know, like it's like, I don't know whether I should say this because I don't know whether it would come across the wrong way, but like some of my gay friends say that when they go to a party, they'll meet somebody, like the party host will go, oh, you should meet my cousin Josh because he's gay. And I'm thinking, well, that's what happens with people with Asperger's. You go to a party and they're like, oh, you should meet my friend because he has Asperger's. Well, just because I have Asperger's doesn't mean I'm going to get on with him. I mean, what do you think it is? Like it's a neurotype, you know? Like, what? And that's so like, I think that, like, because I once went to this conference in Denmark, and I got there and there was this dinner in the evening. And the hosts were like, oh, I'm like, oh, is this where the dinner's happening? They're like, yeah, but you're going to have dinner in this little room with these other people on the spectrum. And the other people on the spectrum, they look lovely and everything, but they're Danish, right? And so their first language is Danish. So, and like, they're going to be having a sensory experience with the food, and then the conference organizer is expecting them to then speak in their second language. And that just seems really unfair. I'm like, but then they'll have to speak English. And that seems unfair and hard. And they're like, oh, but they speak English all the time. And I'm like, oh, okay, look, one, I don't know any of these people. I'm sure they're really nice, but my mates are all sitting in there, so I want to sit with my mates, just like anybody else would. Like, don't you want to sit with your friends at lunch? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, there you go then. That didn't actually happen. I just said I want to sit with my friends. And so I did. And the way that I am at dinner parties is I eat my food and then I can't sit still, right? So I'm just getting up and I'm wandering around. I'm talking to people. a couple of times I won an award and I went to this award ceremony, and like as soon as there was the chance to wander around, I was just wandering around, talking to people, and everybody else was sat in their seats, and I just can't do that. So, that's why that it's. I know that it works for some people, but I just, as a principal, like, oh, we're gonna have an Asperger's support group because people with Asperger's are all gonna get on. It just seems silly to me.
I have an autistic son, and I wonder if you're able to know when somebody else has autism or doesn't.
Oh, the autism doll, yeah, okay. Well, yeah, some people say they have a bit of an Aspie doll and they can kind of recognize it. Sometimes, maybe, but I mean, it also maybe depends on, like, if you're autistic and you hang out with loads of other autistic people, then I think you learn what autism can look like, but I mean, you can't always tell. I think, that's kind of like a gaydar. I mean, you genuinely cannot tell if someone's gay, can you? So I think it's not like they walk around with a big sign on their head that says, I'm gay, So I think it's the same thing that maybe sometimes, like if you're a gay guy and you meet another gay guy and you're kind of checking each other out, then okay, well, maybe then you might think, oh yeah, he might be gay because he's kind of checking me out, okay. Like, yeah, maybe then, but like otherwise, I'm not sure if you can really tell.
What do you think is some of your strengths?
Well, I think the hyper-focusing, for one. I'm pretty determined, like if I decide I'm going to do something, I just do it, even if it kind of seems stupid and a bit scary. I was in San Francisco last night, and I decided I was going to go to a movie on 16th and Mission, and like I didn't even really think that was particularly scary until Jasmine, my friend, mentioned it at dinner, and I was like, well, I don't know, it's okay. I mean, it seems like the rest of San Francisco, apart from the financial district, and maybe the Haight-Ashbury's, maybe that's a bit posher, but I mean, I hang out in London in all the different neighborhoods, so yeah, so if there's something I want to do, I just do it. Because I kind of feel like when I was in school, I was just really trapped. It was like wearing a straitjacket or something, Couldn't do anything, couldn't leave, was stuck there all the time. And now I'm an adult, and if there's something I want to do, well, I'm just going to go and do it anyway. And then I'll deal with the consequences as it goes. I try and risk assess things, but I mean, sometimes stuff happens, but to be honest, I've never really had anything terrible happen when I was traveling. The worst thing, I'm not really sure I should tell this story on tape either, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I was traveling back from the West Coast, and I think I was in Seattle, and it was cold. It was like December. And I flew to Vancouver, and then I was flying from Vancouver to London, and I got like food poisoning or something. And it's cold, right? And I'm sat on this plane, and the plane is being de-iced, which, means that you wear your seatbelt, but you basically just sat there. And I really needed to go to the loo, the restroom. And I asked, I'd already been once, but I asked if I could go again. And the cabin crew was like strapped into their, those, wherever those seats are, the crew seats. And they're like, no, you can't go. And eventually I was like, well, there was this drunk guy behind me going, let her go to the loo! I'm like, so eventually I'm like, okay, well, I can see that there's going to be two scenarios here. One is that basically I shit myself on this seat and it stinks, and then everyone has to sit through it for 11 hours. Or I take my life in my hands, which I didn't think was too much of a risk, and I walk 3 foot to the restroom, and I go to the bathroom, and no one gets covered in shit. So that's what I did. And anyway, when I got up, the crew they gasped. They were like, oh! And I was like, all I've done is undo my seatbelt and walk 3 foot. Really, we stood still anyway. It's like, it takes a while to taxi. Like, after the de-icing, it's not like the plane just goes, whoop, I'm up now. It has to go, so there was no risk, really. Anyway, I think by the noises that I probably made when I came out, they realized I was actually quite ill. And I managed to get some sleep, and then I ate some crackers, and I felt better. So that's probably the worst thing that's happened, and that wasn't even that bad. I've never had trouble. I've never been mugged. I've never had any kind of I've never had any trouble when I've travelled, and I've travelled a lot, and so going to 16th and the Mission and going to the cinema didn't really seem a big deal to me. But yeah, I think that self-determination of, I'm just going to do it anyway, I think that that's quite good. And sometimes that can be annoying though, because I'm like, I don't really think I should do that. Like, I didn't tell my parents I was going to America for the first time. They found out in a newspaper. Because I knew that they'd worry about me, and I was already worried, and I almost didn't go, and I went anyway. They found out on the newspaper. My dad was like, oh, the veterinary assistant says you were in the newspaper. And I was like, it's not me. He's like, there was a picture. I'm like, it's not me now. I have prosopagnosia. I don't recognize faces. But my dad doesn't have prosopagnosia, and he knows what I look like. So does a veterinary assistant. And so, so that's how they found out, and they were quite cross. And this was during a 3-hour road trip from my parents' house to London that my dad confronted me. And when I got to London, pretty much as soon as I opened the door, the phone rang, and it was my mom, and she was like, have you got anything to tell me? I was like, nope. Are you going to America? Yep. They were very cross with me. And they went on about it for about 8 years. And it just stopped going about it. So I suppose that's a thing. I think also being able to collect detailed information. I don't even appreciate how detailed it is until other people tell me how detailed it is. And basically, I think they might be saying, actually, that's probably enough now, Robyn. Okay, that's all right. I've got used to that. That's fine. But it would be good if you were a bit more blunt sooner. But I think that being able to collect information is quite helpful because, I can tell you about autism books and papers and stuff like that. All right, well, let's go ahead to the next bit of my talk. So I'm going to talk a bit about my research, and I've rejigged these slides since the ones this afternoon, so they might come out in the wrong order. But hopefully, I think that they're going to come out in a more logical order than they did this afternoon. Okay, so I've done a bunch of like I said, it's community interest research. So it's research, but it's not because I want to know the answer. It's because I think that something needs to change. So like stimming, I saw a psychiatrist to talk about stimming, and I felt like he was wrong, and I wanted to prove him wrong, and I knew he hadn't asked 100 autistic people. So I asked 100 autistic people, and I proved him wrong. He can go ask his own 100 autistic people if he wants. And then the safety thing was because I'd had experience of abuse, and I saw it happening to someone else, which is how I realized that what I'd experienced was abuse, and then I felt bad because I was telling this person to stay away from this abusive guy, and I felt like she needed to make her own decisions. And so I wanted to write a book for the many autistic people in those situations. Meltdowns, because I was asked to speak at a conference, and I thought there was a waste of time me just talking about my own meltdowns because everyone is different. Periods, because there wasn't any books for autistic people that are just about periods, and it seemed like there was a lot to know. And then, okay. So for the stimming thing, I guess that maybe you all know what stimming is, so it's repetitive movement like flapping or rocking, that kind of thing. Asked 100 autistic people, they told me 102 different types of stims. So by that you can see that at least 2 people said they did more than one kind of stim, but actually I know that lots of people did lots of different stims. And that the top 3 reasons for stimming, I'm big on the top 3 reasons, were to reduce anxiety, deal with sensory issues, and to calm down. So from that you can see it's obviously like a coping mechanism for a lot of people. And I'm not trying to say that this is everything of reasons why people stim, because there were loads of reasons. I've just sort of condensed it for the slide, but like for example, I think this is off the top of my head, I'd have to look it up for sure, but I think 18% of people said they used it to communicate excitement, for example. So it doesn't always have to be a negative emotion, and certainly every person is individual, and there's no way I could possibly, like even if you asked 1 million autistic people, you still wouldn't know for sure 100% that if your young person wasn't within that 1 million people, that you knew why they were stimming. And also I think it probably varies, and people stim for different reasons. So 50% of people said they enjoyed it, 30% of people said sometimes, 72% of people had said that they'd been told not to do it at some point. Stimming's a coping mechanism for many autistic people, and that's the message that I heard loud and clear. Now, sometimes stimming might be self-injurious, or it might be injurious to other people, or it might be distracting to other people, or it might be getting in that child's way of learning, and in which case, and you should probably do this anyway, you need to find out why the person's stimming, and look at what needs they have that need to be met, and then put strategies in place. But just telling a kid to stop, that's like saying to someone, oh, okay, well, go swimming, but like, stop breathing, hold your breath, like the whole time, even when your head's out of the water, eventually you're gonna go blue, because breathing's a coping strategy, because our hearts need us to breathe. We need oxygen in our lungs. That lung and heart system works together, so we need oxygen. We need to be breathing and we need to be exhaling. So if you told somebody, oh, well, just hold your breath, well, actually you'd pass out. You'd start breathing again, probably. But don't take away people's coping strategies, but try and understand where it's coming from. Because obviously, if something is self-injurious, obviously nobody wants their child to be hurting themselves. In which case, you need to understand why. Now, sometimes it might be frustration. You can't stop a kid from being frustrated at some point. This is a perfectly normal human reaction, but in which case you might need to find a stim that they can do that will meet that need, that will help them release their frustration. My parents tried this with me, and I'm not sure how successful it was. But, having said that, I think that I'm not sure that it was stimming so much, but I had self-injurious behaviours. I don't really think they were stimming, because it was like biting my arm, banging my head and stuff. But I found, actually, once I started taking antidepressants, that all that behaviour went away. Once I was on the right antidepressant, I was like, oh, I can sleep without banging my head now. This is pretty good, because I didn't really enjoy it. It's not like I was like, hey, this is really fun. Like, it was like, I need to do this. And I think that a lot of stimming for autistic people, is that they need to do this. And so you need, for me, and I'm not suggesting that drugs are always the answer, but for me, I just had really high levels of anxiety. And also the other thing that helped was taking the progesterone-only pill, because it meant that I didn't have PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is probably more common than we know, but what it is it's depression just before your period. So you can have suicidal ideation, but just before your period. When your period starts, all that stuff goes away. And that's what used to happen. And I would, go to a music rehearsal that I wanted to be at and start crying for absolutely no reason, or I'd get triggered by the smell of soap because it reminded me of something small like that. And so that mix for me has worked really well. And what I'd say to you is that, the thing is about medication is don't medicate somebody to make them normal. If there's a reason for medication, like for me, the reason was that I really had an anxiety disorder, and maybe some of it is kind of post-traumatic stress disorder from school, from bullying, because autistic people can sometimes have PTSD triggered from what might to other people seem trivial, but for autistic people it's a really big deal, like bullying in school. It's hard to say, but for me, certainly, I tried a lot of the, I'd been under a psychiatrist and done groups and all that stuff, and none of that stuff seemed to really help me. Because I was just too anxious to really be able to take it in. So that was really important. But this is a poster I did. I think there's 74 stims in this poster. And you can go to my website, robynsteward.com/stims. /stim, the singular. This specific survey was people, either their parents filled it out for them, or autistic people filled it out for them. So it's not representative, particularly of that part of the autism community. There is some research which is happening at Northeastern by a guy called Matt Goodwin. I think it's Matt Goodwin. Anyway, and what they're doing is they're specifically targeting people who aren't able to speak, aren't able to explain, and they're strapping well, they're not strapping them down or anything. They're just, it's like a watch on your arm, and then a band around your middle, and then they're...
Is it kind of weighted or something?
No. What they're doing, they're sensors. And so what they're doing is they're looking at the kinds of stims, like the language of the stims, if you like, that each individual has. So like you might have a stim in a rock and, you know, different intensities. And then they're using video coding to create, to try and understand the patterns of why people are stimming. But a survey wouldn't be appropriate for that population because they can't explain. So this is definitely not trying to be representative of the whole autism community, but the thing that inspired it was a talk where a psychiatrist said, when have you ever met someone who likes to flap? Which, there's a lot of autistic people who like to flap. And then he said, oh, well, people only like to do that because they've been told not to do it. I really felt that that was wrong and that there wasn't any like online surveys or anything that said, well, this is autistic people's experience. So it's definitely not trying to represent that part of the autism community because it can't. And I'm certainly not trying to say, oh, this is everybody. But I would check out Matt Goodwin at Northeastern and look at the tools that he has developed because they're quite useful. So this is like a topic that I know from being a member of the autism community, that meltdowns and tantrums are different things. I know that from my own experience, but I also know that from other autistic people. And it's really, I got asked to give a talk about meltdowns. And I was like, well, I haven't really had a meltdown for a long time. They really don't happen that much for me now. But I know that many autistic people have meltdowns, and that it was really important to me to try and be more representative other than just my own experience. So the top 3 reasons people said that they had meltdowns were stress, emotionally overwhelmed, and anxiety. And these, so now that I'm an honorary research associate, like now I can access an ethics board and all that stuff, but at this point, this was for a presentation at a conference and there wasn't a lot of point in doing that for me at the time. Now it's much easier, but I think when this, I had to learn how to deal with an ethics board and things like that, and that takes time, and I haven't learned that yet. So these are like the experience, what does it feel like to have a meltdown? And this doesn't have statistical analysis, because I'm still not that great with statistics. But there were only 100 autistic people who answered, so when it says like 70, so 76, when it says 76, that's 76%, because 76 people to check that box. So you can see like what it feels like, and there's a range as well, and it's fairly obvious that people tick more than one box, so they're experiencing multiple things within a meltdown. And certainly none of these surveys are supposed to be like, this is how all autistic people feel or experience the world or anything, but I was doing this because when I'd go online, there wasn't anything that talked about autistic people's experience. It was all about the caregiver's perception. I would have to look it up, but it was a range of ages, like mostly adults, yeah. The online surveys often there are more females that fill it out than males, which, I can't do much about that really. Like when, if I do something that is funded, like I can work a bit harder on trying to balance out the gender, but it's not always possible. But to be honest, a lot of researchers tell me that getting 100 people to fill out a survey is really hard, and I always find it really easy. Like the Stimming one, people filled that out in 9 hours. I got 100 people in 9 hours. It didn't take 9 hours to fill out, it took like 10 minutes, but 100 people in 9 hours is pretty good. And most people can't get that. So they're definitely not perfect, and they're certainly not, I'm not trying to represent a particular gender or say that this is everybody. So people said after a meltdown that they felt exhausted, embarrassed, and in pain emotionally. And I felt like the embarrassment here was really important. People, like if you have diabetes and you have a hypo, like hopefully you wouldn't feel embarrassed about that. People around you know what diabetes is, and hopefully they look after you and they're kind to you, and you know it's not your fault. There's no need to feel embarrassed. And I think that meltdowns, there's no need to feel embarrassed because you can't help it, like you're at the point of no return. What helps after a meltdown is sleep, talking to someone who understands them, and listening to music. Yeah, so I think that this is like, again, these surveys are like, when I'm doing them, I'm doing it just because there isn't anything else out there. So I'm not doing it to try and you know, I guess that it's not as concrete research as other people, but bear in mind that these topics, there isn't anything else that is just autistic people. There might be now, but this was in like 2014. And so for me, that's really important. The women's survey I did, the women's safety survey, I think that this comment for me sums up why it's so important. So basically, the overall message was that autistic women are more gullible and it's easier to manipulate autistic people, but in this circumstance, women. But I think that that is probably not gender specific in my experience, but that is purely anecdotal. But this research participant, and I got permission to share what people said that was part of the consent within the survey. I know what it's like to desperately want friends and to do anything to make them happy and accept you. In the end, it's not worth it because it just makes you more miserable. It's taken me nearly 30 years to understand that not everyone who is friendly towards me has nice intentions, and that a real friend would not make you feel bad about yourself. Better to have no friends than friends who treat you like dirt. And I think, when you think about it, it took her nearly 30 years, so she could be 30 or she could be 60. Like, it's, I don't know how old this person was, so. And the kind of experiences that she must have had to write something so eloquently like that. So the research that I did on women's safety, it kind of steered the book, my first book that I wrote, The Independent Woman's Handbook for Super Safe Living on the Autistic Spectrum. It's written there on the front cover. It's long, it's very literal. But this book for me was really, I didn't know I could write a book, but I did. So that's one of those things. So I knew that writing a book was important, and I should do it around the age of 25 because I didn't have a degree or anything. And so I was co-chairing a conference, and the publisher was there, and they'd already rejected me in the past. But I went up to them and I said, "Hi, I'm Robyn. I'm one of the co-chairs." And I said, "Oh yeah, we read about you." And I said, "Well, I'd like to write a book." And I said, "Okay." So we had a meeting, and we decided on women's safety. And so the research really steered the content. So, like for example, the friendship and romantic relationships, the sex chapters are all quite big. But then, like the work chapter, because there's lots of other books about work, is smaller because I was focusing on what people told me within the survey, and also I had a group of peer reviewers, and there were a mix of autistic people and professionals, and so I was making sure that when I put a strategy in or when I said something, that it wasn't just my opinion, it did actually work. And at the time I was working as a mentor, so I was putting these strategies directly into place, although not always with women, but I felt like nobody else had written a book like this, and the nearest that comes to it is Leanne Holiday-Willie's book, but I felt like that's a really important book, but I felt like this came from a slightly different stance with the research that I'd done. So then I did period research, and to be honest, I much prefer talking about the period research than I do women's safety. To start off with, I wasn't that keen on doing period research, because I was like, why would I want to do period research? Doesn't everyone know about periods? But then I realized, but there's no book about periods for autistic people. And autistic people, I know from being autistic and from when you read about autism, it says, autistic people need literal information. And I was like, well, I've written anything. Okay, that's the thing I could do. So I did a survey. This survey was done with University College London, and there was a team of us, and we did a thematic analysis, which means that you read through the free text boxes, like where people have written whatever they wanted to write, and you pick out themes. And these were the themes that we picked out. And this is published in an open access paper, and if you go to my website and you click on, I think it's either under research or under publications, you can access this for free, but basically there were kind of a bunch of themes. So periods are so these are what people said, that periods are normal, a natural part of life, that understanding the various ways it affects you is important, understanding what's not normal for the person, knowing what to expect is important, and periods exacerbate autism-related challenges such as sensory issues and executive functioning. I was particularly, I'd never heard of cloth pads or menstrual cups or period underwear. I'd never heard of that until I did this, and autistic people told me that these were very important for managing sensory issues, and that they were, when people discovered that, it really made periods a lot easier. So I tried all of them and started researching, and I think I wrote a fairly comprehensive guide. And you can also have a look at the website autismfriendlyperiods.com, and there is some information that isn't in the book that's just about what cloth pads are, and links to full videos for cups and stuff. But yeah, there are some photos, and so I feel like, wow, that was really worth doing. I also developed this flap system. It's just a page you cut out, and then the pictures are all on a grid, and you can cut the flaps out so that you can control how much you see. And then the latest thing I did was around self-employment. So I'm writing a book about self-employment, and if any of you know anything innovative around self-employment and autistic people, I'd be interested to hear about it. So I asked 100 autistic people. This is the breakdown of kind of how they fitted into self-employment. So not everybody was full-time. Some people might have had an experience previously, and now they were in just regular employment. The areas of difficulty people said were knowing where to start, like how to start a business, what is a good idea, that kind of thing. How you get work as a self-employed person, and networking, which isn't surprising, I guess. The other project I'm involved in is, as I mentioned earlier, that I'm a core team member of the Heart and Soul at the Hub Award 2018 to 2020. And we're giving people with intellectual disabilities and autism the opportunity to work with us. We've developed an app, which is a survey app, which is not going to be, it's not like a commercial thing. It's just so that people with learning disabilities and autism can ask questions. And so people with learning disabilities and autistic people can answer questions, but not just using type, because not everybody types or reads, but using pictures and using audio and using video. So it's like a range of things. So we've done that. I host a monthly music jam, which is really important because it brings people from Welcome who might not have met people with learning disabilities and autistic people together with people with learning disabilities and autistic people. And we're all equal when we just play together. And it's not like we're not playing songs, we're just making good sounds together and having a nice time. So yeah, so that's, I thought there might be a contact slide, but there's a web address there. And thank you very much for listening to me. And I'll take some questions.
It seems that one of the themes that was brought up a lot was that sensory piece, the sensory overload. My child is 7, and so I guess I'm just looking for a little bit of insight into what may be going on. Is that sensory overload, is that something that that autistic people have actual thoughts where they can say the music is too loud? Are they processing it that way, or is it just an emotional disruption? Does that make sense?
I think it depends on the person. I think that sometimes it's just that there's so much sensory information. It's a bit like, if you ever walk into a freshly painted room, you know how it stinks. And after a while, it can give you a bit of a headache and it'll be a bit overwhelming. It's kind of like that, but with all of your senses at once. And then, when the fire alarm went off at school, I had sensory overload. But then the teachers would be like, oh, I'd take you back in the building so you're away from the crowds of people. But that made it worse because I could hear like 11 different fire alarm sounds. So I think look at Olga Bagdashin's work, because I think you'll find that interesting. And I think also that, it just depends on the person. Some people are like oh yeah, it's the music or the lights, and I also think that it's something you can learn as you grow older, what things you need to do. Like there's a guy called Stephen, and Stephen, whose surname I've forgotten. But anyway, he always wears a cap because it stops the light glare from the top. I don't wear a hat for that reason. I wear it because I recognise myself in photos. So some people do that, and then Stephen Shaw, that's it. And then some people need polarized glasses. Some people need dark lenses. Like as you get older and you start to realize, oh, okay, I'm sound sensitive. I need to wear earplugs. Then you're like, oh, okay, I'll just bring them with me, or ear defenders, or whatever you need. Or it could be your clothing. It could be, like that you have used a different fabric conditioner, or a different, those things that you put in the dryer, the sheets you put in the dryer. Or, like it could be a label, or it could be just having to change clothes between PE and your normal clothes, or it could be different shoes, or like anything like that. So I think each person's very different, and you just have to learn. And I think you learn by trial and error, and just keeping notes as much as possible.
When we're thinking about inclusion, and then also thinking about how overwhelming high school was for you, and how upsetting and horrible the bullying was, what your recommendations are for how we can do inclusion successfully?
I think you need to teach everyone in a high school, from the janitors to we call them dinner ladies, dinner supervisors, head teachers, governors, everyone that comes into that school that has any interaction at all, even if it's minor with the kids, then they need to know about autism. And the kids need to know about autism. And they need to know, like now we are happy to talk about gay rights, and you can get married if you're gay, and probably within a child's class there's probably gay parents of the other kids, and that's perfectly normal now. And it's the same with like we would never tolerate racism in school. Like we'll have classes with kids from all different kinds of backgrounds, and like racism is not at all acceptable. And the same with gender, and now we're becoming, I think that society's becoming more aware of transgender, but we know that like you can't be horrible to someone just because they're a woman, or horrible to someone because they're a man, or horrible to someone because they're trans, or any other gender for that matter. And so with autism and with intellectual disability, learning disability, whatever, well, you have to learn about those too, and they're just as important because we're all human, and that's what brings us all together. And so I think really if you want to do anything in life, I think that what we're seeing now in the current day is that we are sometimes not really behaving with respect towards each other, and I don't think that works out well.
I am also a special education teacher, and we have a big push at our school over the last 5 years to include the students on IEPs in the general education setting. And I'm sort of one of the players that helps spearhead that, and even 4 or 5 years later, we're still having trouble with the general education teachers wholeheartedly accepting that inclusion movement. And something you said earlier about the teacher didn't want you because you were behind. How did you know that? Because I'm just doubting that she outright told you that.
Yeah, she told me. She, because we were learning times tables, and I only learnt the 2 times table, the 10 times table, the 5 times table, and everyone else had learned all of them. And she once took me over to a desk, and then she was like, "Look, you're behind." She was showing me this chart, and she was like, "Look, you're behind." Yeah, so, and my mom told me that she didn't want me in her class. But I think that my advice to you would be to tell the general ed teachers that this is what we're doing. There's not a choice. If you don't like it, go to another school. But the reason that we're doing this is because these kids are humans, just like all the other kids. They have the same rights as all the other kids. And the kids in general ed, as well as the IEP students, when they're older, there isn't like special like places where people with IEPs go as adults, and all the normal people are over here. Like, it doesn't work like that. So if they really care about the future of America, and they really care about it, then we've got to have people together, because this is stupid as saying, oh, we're gonna have, you know, all the Latino people over here and all the African American people over here. Like, we all understand now that kind of segregation is completely wrong, and that everybody is human, has the same rights, and that if they're not down for that, then well, I'd suggest that maybe they should look back on the Constitution, because I'm sure the Constitution must say something about like everybody being, you know, like working together, or like, you know, like it doesn't work to be segregated. We know that with race, and we know that with gender. So why would neurodiversity be a problem? Like, if you really feel like, oh, well, it's going to slow everyone else down or whatever, well, you know, like, with all this pressure that people put on school, like, if your kids can come out of school and they can read and write and do basic math, read a bank statement, which isn't taught in schools anyway, use a computer, they understand basic biology, chemistry, and physics, so that they understand what's happening around the world, and they can label their body parts so that when they go to a doctor, they can ask for help appropriately, and they can go to CVS or Walgreens and they understand, you know, what they might need, and they know what hay fever is and diabetes and all that stuff, then that's doing a good job. Like, if they get history and religious education and geography and all that other stuff, and higher level maths and algebra and blah de blah de blah, all that stuff, well, that's great. But you know what? Like, really, when you're in school, when you're a kid, your job is to learn how to be a good human, and it's the humans around you that are teaching you that. So if those teachers want to teach, you know, not accepting people that are different to ourselves, and not being tolerant, and not helping each other, and not being part of a community, probably they don't have a place in your school. Because your school probably has values that we all work together. We're all part of this community, and if you don't like it, well, why don't you go live on some island by yourself and see how you like it? Because that is basically what you're saying these children should do. And those children are not adults, and they're not in control of the world. And as teachers and adults, you are in control of the world. So you have a choice about how those people grow up and how other people treat them.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was created in 1998 with a promise to find cures for neurodevelopmental disorders. Every day, our physicians and researchers come closer to fulfilling that promise. Their groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other brain disorders are helping children achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.